from the GHI aspect to where a lot of the research is going now. And that's of great interest to me, and hopefully to you as well. Because whenever I was in Belize, I was introduced to a phenomenon which I wasn't aware of before. Now, the Mayans, they went down into the underworld. The underworld was a great part of their religion. And they crossed down underneath into these vast cave systems. And we got the opportunity to also go into those cave systems. But something happened whenever we were in there. And it was something that wasn't really explored within the TV show, but it was something that I carried on from there. Because within the cave system, something started to communicate to us. Something that was deeper in the cave system. This cave system extended another 3.5 miles down underneath the mountain. Now, it was absolutely fascinating to hear this thing trying to communicate, trying to call to us. And we had recorders. We planted the recorders along as we walked. And many times we were up to water, up to here, trying to get closer to this thing. I have to say, a lot of the people that were in there, the cave guides, they didn't go as far as we were going, because they were always interested at the stuff at the beginning. And it was absolutely beautiful. I thought what we were seeing at the beginning was beautiful, but it had nothing on where we were actually being led. Now, this thing kept continually calling to us. And again, we planted the recorders on the side. The problem was for us that there was running water as well that was coming down. And it was hard for us to lift the voice and the noise in the water, so we couldn't do it for the show aspect. But we kept pushing on, and we kept saying, what is your name? And then this voice came back with a name. And we said, did everyone else hear that? Yes, we did. We need to keep going on. Now, I led the way. So again, the water was from here to here to here. And it was always careful steps, because you didn't know what was happening. Now, we reached a point where the cave guides were telling us, do not go any further. You cannot listen to these voices. Our grandfathers have told us and warned us about these voices in the caves. They say, if you follow them, you will die. So, of course, that's quite a warning to heed. But being me, let's go a little bit further. So we went to a point where the floor of the cave dropped down into the water, and it went further than a flashlight even would shine. Now, this is crystal clear water, and we couldn't see the bottom. But the voice was calling to us was no more than 200 yards just around the corner. Now, having had a really bad experience in Transylvania with an entity in the water that tried to kill me, I certainly wasn't going to be in a situation and bring the rest of the crew and cast across this expanse of water to get something in around the corner. Because number one, I didn't know how deep it was, and number two, I didn't know what else was in there. So I stopped. I said, that's enough. This is as far as we go. We drew the line, and we turned and we walked back. Now, the moment that we turned and walked back was the moment that it stopped communicating with us. And even on the recordings on the way back, although we could hear the sound of it calling out to us, we couldn't lift the voice from the sound of the water. On the way back, we could hear the water, but again, there was no sound of calling. Now that, of course, opened up a totally new line of investigation for me. What are these things? Why are they driving people? Why are they putting people deeper into the cave systems? To what end? So, the path of research that I was taking on led to the book being released, In the Midst of Gods. Now, the book itself looks at the way that these old deities, these entities, would communicate with ancient man, and as time progressed, the identity of those entities changed, and we perceived them as something else. but the phenomenon stayed the same. Then we moved into the modern age, and from an Irish perspective, for us, what we were dealing with was the same thing that we were dealing with in the caves of the Mayan ruins. And we moved then into ufology, and we found that the things that were happening in ufology, if you strip the mask away, you find it's the same phenomenon that they have done to us as we have developed over thousands of years. These things are not coming from across the gulf of space. They're already here and have been for a long, long time. Now, what the hell they are, of course, is still open for debate. But what I do know is that after leaving the Mayan ruins, I then went into America. I went into one of the gold mines, the old gold mines that's all shut up now, with some of the government officials, because I would never do anything illegal. These guys, they stood at the mouth of the mine, and I went down in, and I was knee deep in water, and oh my goodness, there's a particular poison that they'll use to clean gold from the stone. Arsenic. So that was all in the water, but I didn't care. And I went down and through. Now I got to the end of the passageway where the path started to come up out. And it was then that I realised this really is as far as I should go. My little inner voice, the little person that lives inside my head and says that's the right thing to do and that's the bad thing to do, was on a megaphone. Stop! So I had to listen to that, and I found that, really that instinct that we have is something that we should listen to. And I did turn to come back. The moment that I turned, the voice yelled at me from deeper in the mine that she was in trouble to come back in. Now, at that particular moment, the first thing that shot into my head was the warning from the Mayan ruins. The voices will kill you. So I continued on back, and I got about halfway through the water back to the entrance when she screamed down this passageway. Now, I turned back to look because I was expecting to see this thing right at the end of the corridor. There was nothing there. But as I got back to the mouth of the mine, the government officials were standing. They said, "Now, we've seen you turn back there and look. We heard something. Did you hear something?" And I said, "Yes. We don't believe in any of this. But we heard something." Now, the whole thing, whenever we started to examine it further, we discovered that there was a lot of strange things now beginning, and have done, of course, over the course of man's development. We even see the influence of this behaviour within the development of religions, both modern and ancient. And as we go back and we look at Malta, an island in the Mediterranean, there's a monument there to these, a temple which is underground. They discovered up to 30,000 remains in one of the temples of men, women and children. They believe were sacrificed to these, whatever they are, underground. We also find the same in Israel. There are two twin caves outside Jerusalem. And there too, they also find worship down the caves into something underground. The Celts also done the same. There is a place in Roscommon which I'll be visiting on the 29th of this month. How many people here know what date Halloween falls on? Everybody else suddenly says, "Oh, hold on, wait a minute, maybe it's not the 31st." That's because it's not. Modern society and religion wanted to fix the date, so it became the 31st. But as Halloween comes from Ireland, it's one thing we're very proud of. It's the closest date to the full moon. This year is the 29th of October. So on the 29th of October, I'm going to Roscommon to a cave system. In the cave system, the church have known for hundreds of years and have documented that the doors open and these things, now the church will call them, and I hate using the word, demons, will come out. I don't like calling them that because it doesn't fit. They're not that, they're something completely different. But from their understanding, I can understand why they use that term. But the doors open and these things come out onto the landscape. So for them to come out onto the landscape, they're going to have to trample me. Because I will be in there waiting for this to happen.
When will that one air?
No comment.
See how well the trampoline goes.
I can come out to the camera. But leading on from there, we see that the worship of these things underground always had a darker edge to it, and these things underground always had a darker edge. Now, if we look at the UFO phenomenon, I spoke about this earlier. I'll touch on it briefly now. You've got the missing time, you've got the abductions, you've got the experiments, you've got the whole case of people being mixes of babies and everything else. With ufology, if you step back in Ireland 200 years, you'll find that the fairy did the very same thing. And fairy is not Tinkerbell. That is a bastardization of a term. Fairy actually means fae-eerie, which is a strange state of trance. The same trance that the Greys will put people under to do what they're doing. And the same thing that the old gods did to do what they did on people. So we find it was the same thing all the time. They portray themselves as being one thing when they're something completely different. Within ancient Ireland, there was a great war, and we find this war mentioned in a lot of different civilizations around the world, where there was a fight. This great battle happened, and we won. We won because we were able to actually kill them because they were killing us. But we found a particular mineral that killed them. And because that suddenly happened, they went, oh, wait. The agreement was made, according to legend, that they went underground and we were given everything above ground. Now it's interesting as well, whenever we refer this to the Bible itself within the Christian following, it said, and God said, man had dominion over all things living upon this earth. He didn't have to mention everything that lived in it. So that was always one thing that always was sticking in my mind. What the hell really are these things? Where are they coming from there? Now, whenever we go and examine it further, back in 1984, in Rendlesham Forest, we had a big UFO case. Now the guys that were in the Air Force base witnessed this light coming down out of the sky, and they assumed that it had crashed in a forest just outside the perimeter fence of the Air Force base. So they got a search team together, went into the forest, and seen this thing, this steel object glowing in the trees. Radiation was up through the roof, and they weren't quite sure what on earth they were looking at. Suddenly it went up into the sky and was gone. Now this thing came back the following night and the night after that. One guard went up to the side of the metal of this thing and put his hand on it. Now he was hit with a binary code. This binary code he took because it kept plaguing his brain. He wrote it down in a diary to the very point, and then put it away in his desk and left it for about 10 years. Now then, the guys came along from the good folks from the History Channel, they took the binary code and got it translated into English. Now, to try and make a word from binary code is almost impossible unless you know the binary code. what we found was a message for the betterment of the earth. Well, again, there we go again. Why, if you come from an alien world, billions of miles away, do you give a damn what the hell happens on this planet? Unless you're already here. And there was a set of coordinates that were in that code as well. The coordinates took us off the west coast of Ireland. Now, whenever we look, there's nothing there. It's just the Atlantic Ocean. But back in the 11th, 12th, and 13th century, the Greeks and the other map makers who had already plotted out, we shouldn't forget, they had already plotted out the coastline of the Antarctic. How on earth did they do that? We don't know. But off the coast of Ireland, they plotted two islands. One was called Damar, and the other one was famously called High Brazil. Now, within subsequent years, those islands vanished. In the modern maps, there's nothing there. I just happened to be speaking to some friends of mine in the Dublin Geological Society, because I had seen some of the recent scans off the west coast of Ireland, and guess what seemed to appear? 200 metres down, two dots that matched Damar and High Brazil. Now, my big question was, how did they know that they were there? The scientists said, we don't know. Which is not a bad thing. You know, to admit that you don't know is fine. But then I said, well, what do you think it is? Could it be a sunken island? No, it's probably a coral mound. Okay, you used probably. Do you know, have you scanned that area? Well, you know, we have looked at other mounds in the area, and it probably is. Again, you're using the word probably. Then another guy came forward and said it's probably a volcano. He said, okay, there's two different opinions, and one of them is probably. And I asked them again, how can these map makers be so close to those two island points on the old maps, which matched your advanced maps that you made a year ago? We don't know. But here's the interesting thing. The Rendlesham Forest incident back in 1984, where the binary code was given, the set of coordinates that were given was 80 kilometres off High Brazil. Now, in the great scheme of things, those coordinates could have been anywhere around the world. The Atlantic Ocean is over 14 billion square miles, or 14 million square miles. The idea even of a coincidence is so far-fetched. Something was connected. Now, I asked the scientists then, what happens if we plot the shift of the continental plate through? How close will that set of coordinates match that sunken island? Unfortunately, what they came up with was, we don't know. So it's just left. It's now left at that. And of course, with it being 200 metres down, it's too far for me to dive. Otherwise, I would have been in a wetsuit and going down to see what was there. Now, we also find a very, very unusual thing that has happened, because, again, back in Ireland, I was using a series of vibrations. Now, these vibrations, they're modulating frequency. When used in a specific area, it causes a resonance. That resonance was also used by ancient man in their worship sites, because it shut down the communication centre of the brain, the left-hand hemisphere, and opened up your intuition. That allowed you to communicate with your God. Now, those guys were very well tuned. They knew exactly what they were doing. Now, we started to use this modulating frequency, which was mimicking what they were doing. What we seen was happening is that there was a particular doorway was opening, and these entities were coming through. We were able to see these in military-grade night vision. And we could watch them come through, and we actually watched them come across the ceiling in one of the experiments. The scuttle across the ceiling to get to the sound of the vibration, the source of the vibration. Now, I've run the experiment now with over 60 people, and we're all saying the same thing. But recently, on a visit to Rhode Island, it was brought to my attention of this thing that had happened back in 1997 over in the Pacific. Now, for us being in Europe, we don't really get to hear that much about what happens in the Pacific. Most of our information comes from the eastern side of the United States across the Atlantic into Europe. The same with World War II. We really know nothing about what was happening in Asia. We know everything about what was happening with Hitler and the Russians. Now, back in 1997, there was this unusual sound was recorded in the bottom of the ocean in the Pacific, 1,000 miles off the coast of Chile.
The bloop.
The bloop, yes. And the bloop was loud enough to be heard over 5,000 miles. Now, I had never heard this, and it was played to me. I said, yeah, let me hear it, because I have nothing else to do. And they played the vibration. It was the same frequency modulation that we are using to open doors on the surface, but at a rate which would open bigger doors. Now, my question once I heard it, who the hell is opening doorways at the bottom of the ocean? So there's big mysteries, of course, and there really are still big mysteries happening around the world. Bigfoot, that's still the big mystery. There's other different, what do we call them? Cryptids. There's still a lot of different cryptids around the world. Still great mysteries, but what we're seeing is that these things seem to be connected with something under the ground. They seem to be retreating to a cave system, to a tunnel system. Now, it's strange as well that the Apache, they've also commented that these things that they're worshipping underground, they said that they're not having to go as deep anymore. And I said, why? On my last trip to Arizona. And they said, well, what we're worshipping is closer to the surface. And I thought, you don't have to tell me that. But what these are, we really don't know. The big mystery is we don't know. We know that there's something going on. We don't know what it is. Every time we try to get close, then something happens. They always try and guard that secret. Now in Ireland, I got to speak to some of the miners there, and some of the tales that they were telling me were frightening. The hair stood up in the back of my neck, with the reports of hearing women scream deep down in the mines that are not being used. They're hearing these screams coming from deeper down inside. And I said, is it possible it's rats? And I said, no, absolutely not. And I said, so do you hear these often? We do, but we're there to do a job. We have to focus on the job. And I said, what happens to the people who go and look for them? He said they usually end up dying. So there's a lot that happens, again, under our feet. The Germans call them kobolds. They've experienced them as well. In England, they're known as knockers. So there's a huge amount of stuff going on. In Germany, we found that Adolf, little tiny man, funny moustache, he, of course, was fascinated by this whole idea of tunnels that lead into other areas and things like that. So he sent an expedition into Tibet and everything else. And whenever they came back from there, we found that suddenly there was a hike in development of the infrastructure, of the weaponry that the Nazis were using. Then they took it further and they started tunneling into the mountains. And they started developing advanced technology from there. Now, one of the engineers was brought back to America to work on the Apollo missions. And he was asked, how did suddenly the Nazis become so advanced? Well, they had help from them. And who exactly are them? So that was the big thing, what on earth is going on? Who is communicating with who? We find now in the United States now there are reports in Arizona and Nevada of the military now closing access to cave systems and tunnels. They're exploding them. They're seizing them. They're stopping people from going into them. Why is the military doing that? that surely should be a local authority coming along and saying, okay guys, you can't do that, you can't go into it. Why is armed military going and closing these tunnels? So there's a huge big thing going on at the moment. There seems to be unusual changes going on. We don't know what on earth they are. But there's something very strange going on. So anyway, that's in the midst of gods. And I hope I haven't terrified you to death. But you know, you think of all these tunnel systems. There's 360, I think it's 360,000 or something like that, tunnels that are known about in the US, or caves. But there's expected or estimated to be another 480,000 tunnels. In Brazil, that was another thing before I forget. I've located a guy in Brazil who built a town over the top of cave systems to communicate with these things that are coming out of the ground. Now, fair play to him. I'm still trying to find him. I want to get down into Brazil, into the centre of Brazil, and find out where this is. The people who have gone into the cave systems. Excuse me, it's terribly dry. The people who have gone into the cave systems, all of the people who have gone into the cave systems have not returned. So we don't know what's going on. Yes, sir.
Actually, about 50 years ago, the Mexican military was sent down towards where the Mayans were at one time.
Yes.
Down to
Probably in the same place I was in.
Yeah, down to the caves there to find the gold that was lost.
Uh-huh.
And one guy came back to the entire unit. And this was a long time ago, of course, so he's pretty crazy now. But the things that he said, he couldn't describe all the crazy things that happened down there or why his unit did not come back. So it's one person has come back from this who's now completely senile.
Yeah.
Probably made senile by this event that happened. There's things living down there that they don't want us to know about.
Yeah, I have to say there's something very, very bizarre going on. You know, and I put my neck in the line. You know, I didn't want to write a book that was based on other books. I wanted to say, well, I got to go and see this for myself. And I started to experience that from the Mayan underworld right in through the rest of the world. And that's what the book's about. It's about my experience, about what I've seen and heard. And it's entirely up to the reader if they want to read it or believe it or whatever. It's entirely up to yourself. I'm not out to convince anyone. It's just a good read, bedtime story, and maybe give you some nightmares along the way as well. Anybody? Yes?
When you were, forgive me, I'm not very familiar with your work, I must honestly say. When you were in the caves, when you heard the voice of the entity, was it like you could hear it with your ears?
Yes.
Or was it through your mind?
No, you could hear it. You could audibly hear it. Yeah.
And were you tempted to go back with, how should I say, reinforcements or different equipment to explore?
No. No. And the reason I didn't is because I find with a bigger group, there's no reaction.
Okay.
In a smaller group, they'll react better. I've definitely found that. Now, in a cave system, or in a tunnel system in Ireland, it hadn't been open since World War II. And I got access to it with 2 cave guides. And we went inside, and my reasons, and I was being truthful, to a point. I said I wanted to get some photographs for the book. Now, I did. I got some photographs. But as the photographs were being taken, we heard the voice deeper in the mind calling to us. And I knew then exactly what it was. And the 2 cave guys were looking at each other going, what's that? Because there's no one down there. The mine extended another mile onto the mountain. And they were convinced because the place could cave in at any moment, they left a guy at the mouth of the mine. They thought it was him. And they went up to question him, and he said it started to rain. I backed off into the corner. I haven't been speaking to anyone. There wasn't even a phone call. And he was perfectly quiet. Now, as I approached where they were talking to him, I could hear their voices, but I could also hear the other voice coming from behind, luring you back into the cave. And that had not been open since World War II.
What type of words do they say? They just say your name, or just
a lot of them. It's very, very hard to try and understand what they're communicating.
Okay.
But a lot of it, you will get the impression you got to go a bit more, a bit closer to it. to hear it a bit better.
Right.
And that's always a problem, especially with the Irish miners. They've warned about that. Again, the stories that they were telling me was crazy.
So based on your intuition, you knew when to stop. And that was
Yeah, usually about the entranceway.
No, I'm finding it to be fascinating.
It really is. It is fascinating. Now, don't get me wrong. That was, going into those mines and things like that was a real experience. Don't get me wrong. I don't enjoy that experience. I don't like the idea of going in somewhere knowing that the roof could come down on my head and that's it. I'm done. Or worse, get probed.
The lady in the water was quite interesting as well, though. Probably a lot of people didn't hear about that.
Oh,
that was crazy.
in Ireland as well. There's a lake there.
Yeah.
Now, this entity has been known for a long time to take people and drown them, pull them down into the water. Now she actually has killed a police diver as well, but she's now started to take people by fours, for children, for fishermen, and what she doesn't take on that year, it'll double the next year. So of course, I had to go. From my perspective, I got into the water. It was a very frightening experience. I was fighting with panic all the time. But whenever we said enough, I came up out of the water and surfaced. The boat was there, the people on the shore was there, the dog was going absolutely crazy, Max. And the people on the shore were getting phone calls from sensitives and mediums who were back in Northern Ireland, who were over in England, get him out of the water! Because they were nearly passing out, and they were screaming back at him, he's already in the water! So it was getting very heated. But whenever we came up out of the water, that's whenever we all seen her. And she was further out in the lake. She came up, and her shoulders came up out of the water, along with the head. And she looked at us, but she was too far away. She was in deeper water, too deep. And I wasn't willing to go to that risk because of the other experiences I had over in Romania. So we called it quits. We said, that's enough, we're done. But it got really crazy that night on the island. There's one house to stay on. We're all in the one room. These lights were exploding from the island itself, going up into the air, boom, lit up the place. It was like some type of camp. And then we were down onto the lake shore. The lights were coming up out of the water and going along the top of the surface of the water. And for anyone who has heard The Grudge, that guttural thing that she does, that's what we heard in the trees. And we said, we're done. And went back to the house and locked the door. So that was that. So any more questions? Yes.
Do you think that the longer that you guys and the other stateside have been doing this over the years, we see more evidence caught? Do you think that's because the more open you become, the thinner that veil gets when you go out on the destination?
Nope.
No?
They will show you what they want to show you. It's
Do
not.
they recognize you guys now when you go? Is that why they're communicating better? Because if you watch from the beginning,
Well, from this, if you're talking about the cave systems,
about like the
in general,
yeah,
Entities.
paranormal.
I think being open to it, being sensitive, allows that to happen. It's got a better chance of that to happen.
Right.
Being closed off to it, you won't get anything at all. Being cynical
Right.
and saying no, there's no such thing, it probably won't happen. And if it does happen, it'll be that much that it'll probably drive you crazy anyway. That's just the way it is. But if they don't want to be seen, they will not be seen. If they don't want to talk, they will not talk. So
My question is kind of like hers. Are you seeing more people come forward now that wouldn't have, say, 5 or 10 years ago? Saying,
well, America's different than home because we like stories. We like to talk. We like to talk to each other. And if we go to the castle, there's a huge big fire, candles, and a fantastic place for exchanging information. A campfire is a great place for exchanging information. But I find in America, people who are coming, once they're in through their door, that's it. A lot of the communication now is developing through social media, there's a lack of actual communication. And for me, my word, I have a huge amount of emails that come through Facebook and Twitter and everything else. That's okay, as some people in here will know. I tend to write back maybe short lines, which might seem a little ignorant, but it's not meant to be that way. It's just short lines, to the point, and that's it, done. Because I like communicating face to face. Even on a telephone, who's ever heard of that? On a cell phone, I will be very, very, very short. It's to the point. But if you set me down face to face, but I prefer that. I prefer face to face communication with people. I think we can get much more from each other face to face than we can over an internet page or a cell phone or a text. Yes.
I saw some ghosting that was similar to the cave thing, but it was like Easter Island with like the heads, spirits going to the heads.
Yeah. In Easter Island, for all the folks here, if you go and have a look at Easter Island on Google Earth, just type in Easter Island on the search, it'll bring you right in around to it. Then zoom out and look north of Easter Island. So you see the squares on the ocean bed, about 500 miles square, with the straight lines coming from them. Very bizarre. And if anybody has got any ideas on what they actually are, I would like to know. Yes, sir.
I actually had, I'll say, kind of back to the cave thing. This cave over here where the caves was found.
Yes.
That's now roped off by the government.
That's correct.
And before they had gone in there, they had found a long table,
There's Egyptian artifacts and things found in there.
Not just that, but there were also giant skeletons sitting at chairs around this table, like they were for tombs.
I've never heard that now, but
have you ever seen like giant skeletons that uncovered archaeologists?
I heard about them. I thought to myself, are they the Vikings that came across? Before Columbus, and all that stuff. I have no real idea about them. I don't know. I know whenever I went to see evidence for these huge big skeletons, suddenly they had vanished. There's a lot of talk about them, but then all of a sudden, whenever I went to actually see them, yeah. Now I do know of an incident that occurred in California, and there was one of the Bigfoots that was actually shot, and they got foot sample, prints, copies of the prints, and blood samples, which went to a particular university in California. I know which one it is, so I'm going to go back and see what's in their archives if they'll let me.
We went to the mines ourselves, and in one place that it really smelled, not like stink. Okay, it smelled like snakes.
Snakes?
Yeah, I can smell.
Well, I know nothing about snakes coming from Ireland.
We weren't in Ireland, but to me it smelled like snakes.
Right.
Really bad.
I have no idea what snakes smell like. I honestly don't. Cucumber?
I've heard some snakes smell.
Kind of a little bit.
So I'm just curious if the caves, if they had that kind of since they don't know that, do they have an odd smell other than just that they were dank, musky?
Yes.
Okay, so
Slightly bitter.
There are caves on the west coast of Ireland that I've been in, and there's unusual marks on the walls. There's bedding that we've found, and we don't know. Like these are limestone walls that have very deep gouges in them. We don't know what on earth is doing that, but what we do know is that some of the older religions are still practiced within those caves, worshipping something within inside. So I'll be back there again as well. Anybody else? Yes.
I noticed throughout your talk you bring up Ireland a lot.
I love it.
Well, I'm from there, but you think a lot of things start there?
or maybe started in the area?
What we done with a lot of the research, we went global. Well, we went all around the world, and strangely enough, it actually brought us back to Ireland again. And I still don't know, at this point it's still early to find out what on earth is so important about a beautiful, wonderful little green island in the Atlantic Ocean.
So if someone wanted to like start reading up more on like the myths and legends, would that be Irish myths and legends start being a place to like start?
Yes. Now it can get complicated because of the use of the language, because it's old, it switches back and forward, and they talk about people that you're going, well, who on earth are they? But the sharing of story was very different back in Ireland. A lot of poets and things would have expressed stories and shared stories, and of course to them those people would have been very famous. Where now you're going, well, who was that person? What did they do? But a lot of them, it's fantastic. There's a lot of really good stories there. Yes. That's the thing as well that we came to with this whole cave thing, because we started to look at the protection element to it. And a lot of people within metaphysics will say, oh, you surround yourself in white light. And maybe a lot of groups will come together and say, okay, let's do a complete group protection. Now, this was the interesting thing, that the old texts state quite clearly, you cannot do a group protection. It fails. White light should not be used. It's also been suggested that whenever we think white, could I get you to stand up a second? Whenever I say white, this is what we think of, this cloud. We think that white. But that's the wrong colour, because they stick to that colour. The problem is, see, the light there, that's white. But the light that's coming down through is all of the colours. We can't see it. You've got to perceive it. That in between is what we should be using, not that. So that's something to keep in mind. From a protection point of view, we see a lot of protection failing now and everything else, and there are reasons behind why it's failing. And there's a lot of that. The reasons behind that comes from the ancient texts. No. Again, you're thinking singular colours. That is all the rainbow of the colours. All the light from there to here. That's all the colours. That in between is what you should be thinking about. Even though we can't see it. It's every colour. Okay? One more question.
How would you go about starting your own little group?
Read all my books. Because knowledge is key. The moment that you start working with knowledge and you start bringing it in, that's good. Because a lot of teens are going out now and they're just what they see on TV and things like that, and they go, okay, yeah, this is great, and they go off to the thrill. Well, there's side effects to that. You've got to understand what those side effects are, identify them, and shut them down. And that starts with knowledge before you step out through the door with any equipment. Okay, folks, I got to wrap it up, but thank you very much for coming.